各位同事，現在我哋開會嚇，我哋夠鐘又夠法定人數。現在進行2017-2018年度立法會嘅財務委員會主席嘅選舉。有效嘅提名呢，須由一位委員口頭作出，另外一名未獲提名嘅委員呢口頭附議，並獲提。
The nomination must be accepted by another member, Mr. Tommy Chang. Thank you. Anyone seconds Ms. Dari Lee? I accept the nomination. Since Mr. Michael Tian is not here and he is absent from this meeting, may we please invite Mr. James Toh to preside over the meeting.
好得明白，即係而家提名咗一個。
Okay. So one nomination has been made. All right. So any other nominations? Dr. Joseph Lee? I can't hear you. You're not getting through. Mr. Kenneth Leung. Any seconder? Ms. Tanya Chan seconds the nomination. Mr. Leung, do you accept the nomination? Yes, I do. Any other nomination? On count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So nomination is now closed. We have 2 candidates. Let's proceed to vote. Yes? Earlier today, I submitted a letter to the then chairman of the Finance Committee, Mr. Chen Kim-po, to raise one question. And that is according to Ms. Dari Lee, if we are to amend the rules of procedure, the chairman of the FC does not enjoy any particular superior status, and the matter has to be referred to the Committee on Rules of Procedure. But in terms of the rules for the Finance Committee, chairman of the FC enjoys great powers. For example, if I want to amend certain proposed amendment to the FC rules, one of the candidates for the chairman of the FC, Mr. Chen Kim-po, said many times during the summer recess that he will be proposing amendments to the rules of the Finance Committee. So I have a question for the Secretariat. Now we have this member who is now running for the chairmanship of the FC. So how can we resolve this potential conflict of interest? Well, as I understand it, you would like to have a question and answer session so that you can put questions to the candidates? Yes, I think certainly we should have a question and answer session like we did a moment ago. But before that, I would like the Secretariat to clarify that we have this certain member, if elected, how can he avoid the conflict of interest that he has put himself in? I know what your questions are about. If the elected FC chairman, well, you want to ask the Secretary how much power is enjoyed by the FC chairman. But the question is that he has a certain stated position, that is to amend the rules, and then he would write to implement that. Well, we are in the process of an election. Whether he or she has a certain position or not, well, I already know Mr. Chen Kim-po's position. So my question is, if this member is elected, would he be in a position of conflict of interest? Well, in a moment, when it's your turn to raise questions, you put a question to him. Then you decide whether to vote for him or not, depending on the answer you get from him. If you ask the Secretariat can only say that, can only answer your question by referring to the power enjoyed by the FC, whether you are talking about an elected FC chairman or another candidate. May I seek a clarification from the Secretariat? I think your question should be put after the FC chairman has been elected, and then the FC chairman should, in relation to your query, refer the matter to the Secretariat for an answer. My judgment is that this is not necessarily related to the election process that we are now processing. Mr. Chu is saying that before and after the election, with the conduct of the candidate or the chairman add to the controversy. You are saying that this is not related to the election, but I think it is. Could you reconsider this? What is not disallowed is allowed according to our rules. You can ask the Secretariat or the legal advisor to explain. They can only tell you what is already in the rules. But we're talking about a novel situation, and during the summer recess, well, we heard such alarming political messages from a certain member saying that the rules will be amended in such a manner. There are only two candidates. The nomination period has closed. Whether it's Mr. Chan Kim-po or Mr. Kenneth Leung, who might have said something about his understanding or their understanding of the rules of the FC, you can put a question about this to the Secretariat. But my duty is to judge whether their speeches, if any, would have disqualified them to run in this election. But I don't think that there is any rule on that, or any rule disqualifying either of the candidates. That's my power. My power is just to decide whether the nomination should be accepted. Well, I think Mr. Chi is talking about ethics, although there may be no rule on this. Maybe you can ask Mr. Chan Kim-po to take this early opportunity to clarify himself, whereas the member chairing the election of the FC, of the chairman of the FC, I don't have the power to decide whether a certain candidate may have an ethical issue to answer for. Although the HC is a different committee, but I do think that it would be better for the candidates to answer questions put by members. And well, although the time limit is just 1 minute, and we can ask questions from different angles. So let me tell you what I would like to have done and see if there are any challenge. I would like to allow 30 minutes for this. If this is accepted, then Mr. Chu's question or other members who would like to raise similar questions may be able to ask questions during the 30-minute session, and I expect questions from different camps to be put to the candidates. I think that's the role that I think I should take up. According to the HC election experience, you can make an arrangement of 1 minute, half a minute, and so on and so forth. But don't limit the entire session to just 30 minutes, so that we don't have to rush to push the button in order to get a chance to ask questions. Mr. Lee, I think 30 minutes is more than enough. Members have expressed their views on different occasions, but I believe 30 minutes will be sufficient. And we have to elect a chairman and a deputy chairman. I don't think it's a good idea to have a very lengthy meeting. Mr. Chu, I don't want to challenge, I'm not trying to challenge the qualification of the two candidates. Mr. Lee raised during the HC meeting that last year it was Mr. Yip Kok Hin who proposed to change the rules of the FC, and Mr. Yip, well, was not a member, was not the chairman of the FC, but we have a new situation here. Now we have a member who is running for the chairmanship of the FC, and who will be doing his job as chairman if elected, with certain ideas in his mind. So I would like the Secretariat to clarify something as an impartial party, that if this person is trying to do this, how can he avoid the conflict of interest? In the last session, the amendments were proposed by Mr. Yip Kok Kim, not by the then chairman, Mr. Tommy Cheung, because it might be the case that at that time the members thought that in order to avoid a conflict of interest on the part of the chairman, the proposed amendment should come from another member. Well, yeah, I understand your point, but I cannot really allow discussion on another matter. On another matter of the FC not related to what I'm supposed to hear. You can only raise issues in connection with whether the two members are qualified to run as candidates. I've allowed you to repeat your points to an extent. We have sort of started the Q&A session for the election, so I cannot allow you to continue. Let's see if there's any question of this kind in the question and answer session, and then they can answer your question as regards whether there's any conflict of interest. If you ask the Secretariat whether there's any conflict of interest, I don't think the Secretariat is in a position to assess any candidate, and I don't think the Secretariat should be involved in any assessment of this kind, unless the Secretariat advises me that because of certain things that have been said, a candidate has been disqualified. So my question is, in view of what Mr. Chu Hoi-dik has said, is there anything that should lead to the disqualification of any candidate? Simply put, according to the rules of the FC and the rules of procedure of the Council, there's nothing on on the matter referred to by Mr. Chu. All right, I intend to allocate 30 minutes. Although I know that would mean that only a few members can raise questions. But according to the experience we just had, in the HC, that would be sufficient for questions to raise. And they can also address the concerns of some members, whether this is going to be too long or too short, a Q&A session. So I will allow 30 minutes. Every member will be given 1 minute, and then we can have answers before another question is put. I suppose Mr. Chen Kim-po and Mr. Kenneth Leung do not object to the Q&A session. If you want to put questions to the candidates, please press the button first. The Secretary has advised that there will be a verbatim record made unless members object. Please press the button if you want to speak.
得，仲有冇？
Any more? Let's have 10 or 11 or fewer than that. Will be okay. The same rules will be applied here. Every candidate has 1 minute to introduce himself, and then there will be questions of 30 seconds and answer for 30 seconds. I'll draw a line here. If no other members want to ask questions, let's do this in the order of the nomination. Mr. Chen Kim-po, 1 minute.
I hope members can support me in continuing as chairman, and I will continue to hold meetings in a partial and fair manner. And in 2015 to 16, we only spent some 1.8 hours per meeting, but last year we used 4.2 hours. So obviously there is a problem with our system. I propose to amend the procedures, the rules of procedures, in order to prevent further waste of time. And filibustering is not the right means to achieve the goals, because it has led to the inability to deal with a few key livelihood issues. Mr. Leung, 1 minute. I will preside over meetings in an impartial manner. Mr. Chan talked about the duration of the meetings increasing from 1.8 to 4.2 hours, but you can see that the rules of procedures never changed. Was it an issue about the chairman or the trust between members? This is something we must explore. We should not trigger a change to the rules of procedures because of what happened in the past 12 months. We must be very careful with this. We started at 5:30 p.m. So we will end by 6 o'clock. We will the vote will start at 1800. 30 seconds for the question and 1 minute for the answer. First, Mr. Ronald Chan. There is an element of continuity with the work of the Finance Committee chairman, and it requires a lot of dedication. But I could see that Mr. Kenneth Leung only attended 55% of the meeting last year, while the attendance rate of Mr. Chen Kim-po was 99%. So given the circumstances, how could you fight for better rules of procedures. Mr. Kenneth Leung, 1 minute. I think it can be interpreted as an intention to slash our speaking time by 55%. Even if you attend for 10 seconds, you would be considered present. So this should not be an indicator of our performance. So the percentage of 50-odd% does not mean anything. Mr. Chen Kin-po, as chairman, of course, should attend 99 or 100% of the meetings, but it didn't mean that I did not care about the operation of the FC. Mr. Chen, 1 minute. Chairman, if I'm elected chairman, I will continue to dedicate my best. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai, 30 seconds. Thank you. Mr. Chen Kin-po said the time spent on government proposals were very long, and they blamed the members, and in particular filibustering. But as you have said yourself, the government's responses have been problematic because they were not to the point. And this is something you have criticized as well. Apart from managing the procedures, what can you do, Mr. Chen Kin-po? Of course, the government had a part to play, but it goes both ways. I often ask the government not to dodge our questions, and if I'm elected chairman, I will continue what I've done. We need to amend our rules of procedures, and on the other hand, I'm not trying to slash the speaking time. The current practice of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 minute, I want to change that to 5, 5, 5, 4, 4, 3. I just don't want to waste time on meaningless discussions, and so that we can focus our efforts on lobbying the government. There have been criticisms of Leshko or the chairman, but the government did not do anything. I merely did not want us to be further divided. Mr. Leung, 1 minute. Communication beforehand is very important. For a lot of items, communication between members and communication between Leshko members and government officials are very important. If we do not achieve that, no matter how much speaking time we have, the government would not take us seriously. The chairman must be able to communicate with every legislator. That would be the most important. I'm confident that I will do a decent job. Mr. Ray Chan, 30 seconds. Chen Kin-po's platform is to revise the rules of procedures that would help the government. Why doesn't he revise the rules of procedure to help us fight the government? Why are you not amending the rules to our advantage? Every member can propose changes, but there is legitimacy in my proposal. For example, I've said that I will remove the ability to move a motion to adjourn. We have a lot of items to go through. So why could we abort the meeting just by moving a motion to adjourn? So there is legitimacy to my proposal. If I'm elected chairman, for motions moved by members, I will not move a motion to amend the ROPs. It would be moved by other members, and I will be impartial. Mr. Leung, 1 minute. In terms of revising the ROP, the only motion that served to amend the rules of procedure was moved by myself. So we need to reach a consensus to ensure the smooth operation of this committee. And amendments to the rules of procedure should not be made out of frustration by someone who did not see success in the past 12 months. You should look at our rules of procedures, and we did not revise them every single year because we take them seriously. You might objectively have negative experiences in the last 12 months, but that is not a reason for revising the ROPs. Mr. Leung said he would preside over the meeting in an impartial manner, and now we are dealing with Rule 37A. As per past practice, for example, for certain members who moved a lot of motions under Rule 37A, if you are elected, how would you deal with these motions? Will you feel that Mr. Chen Kim-po dealt with them properly? Just a second, please. Ms. Adishu. I do not know why Ms. Starry Lee named myself and Mr. Ray Chen. That is what she said. You can have a debate with her later. Mr. Leung. Under the rules of procedure and the FC procedure Rule 37A, there is ample power for the chairman to make an appropriate decision as to whether Mr. Chen Kim-po used his power to come up with appropriate decisions. It is up for debate. And Rule 37A has operated properly, and I will apply the normal practice to most motions under 37A moved by any member. I see that I do not see issues with the existing system, but I do not see how Mr. Chen Kim-po exercised his powers properly in the past 12 months. I have done my best in ensuring order and efficiency of the meetings, as well as ensuring fairness. And I want to point out that understanding of the rules are also very important. Mr. Leung, well, if you do not know the rules properly, you can be misleading. The FC procedures should be managed within the FC, and there's no need to go to the Committee on ROP. The Council merely said we can set up an ROP committee, but whether we would really turn to the committee is up to the committee itself. I have been sticking to the rules because I want to prevent any judicial reviews. So I've worked with LegCo legal advisor as well as the Secretariat. They also have roles to play. Ms. Adishu, 30 seconds. Any revisions should be based on consensus among members from different backgrounds. There's no legitimacy, Mr. Chen Kim-po, because you are both the player and the referee. When we discuss revisions to the ROP at the FC, will you excuse yourself from the meeting and delegate your decisions to others? Every member here would have their own stance, but different people have different roles to play. I truly believe that we can only help the public and enhance the work of the council by revising the ROPs. If I'm elected chairman, I will be fair and impartial. The legal advisor and secretariat would monitor the work of the chairman to make sure that we act according to the rules. Any chairman who ignores such reminders or supervision might be subject to judicial reviews. I understand your concerns. So you can voice your views in a special meeting. Mr. Leung, 1 minute. I want to clarify or correct what Mr. Jinkibo said. When you look at the ROP para 71 brackets 13, this is about the FC procedures. It says unless otherwise specified, for example, for established procedures, they will operate according to the ROP, but the practice and procedure of the committee and its subcommittees shall be determined by the committee. For instance, can you expel a member and ask him or her not to come back within 1 month or 1 year? This is not allowed. So that's why we need the committee on ROP. Mr. Roy Kwong, 30 seconds, please. Chairman, Mr. Chan is a very proper chairman, and in that he approved everything very quickly. Budget overrun of the Sha Tin Central Link, Disneyland expansion, the Kai Tak Sports Park, he approved everything. $38.4 billion worth of contentious funding was approved. So is he defending the taxpayers' money? Mr. Gatland, we need to make proper use of public money. If we allow each member to ask questions of the government for an hour, and if the questions were not satisfactory and the item was still passed, and it would be a waste of time. For certain livelihood items, they should proceed. But for certain contentious items, especially projects with budget overruns like the XRL, why can't we have other ideas or practices?
But this is our duty. We must do this. I think we should give sufficient powers, and the system we have should be one that would allow us to monitor how the government expand public funds. Mr. Chen Kim-po. Well, for major items, we have to spend 20 to 30 hours in the PWSC or other subcommittee before the FC is asked to approve it. So please be fair. On the 29th of July, we almost failed to pass the item for the projects involving three hospitals rather. And for Tung Chung, where the more than 20,000 PRH units were involved, which has experience of more than 4 months. And what about the civil service pay rise? So you're still saying that we are expediting the approval. Well, if you have the interests of the people of Hong Kong in mind, you would have to do what you have done. We have been doing reasonably. All these items were discussed previously at the PWSC. I've never seen such arrogant candidates, as if he doesn't need our votes. He doesn't want our votes. So as a candidate, Mr. Chan, please, you should be more modest. You're just trying to tighten up the procedure, the rules. and cut the time allowed. If, as chairman of the FC, how can you lobby the government so that the government would answer questions in and give relevant answers? As chairman, I will ask the government to do a better job in preparation for the meeting, and will not allow the government to give roundabout and convoluted answers. I think the opposition and the pro-establishment members should work together. We should work together to force the government to do what is the right thing, to do the right thing. We have to find out the shortcomings of the government's argument. That's not, as a member, it's not my job, and it's not my intention to allow the government to do a perfunctory job. I just don't want to have infighting among members and the government officials sitting there having nothing to do. I hope Mr. Chan would be able to control his temper and not try to argue with members. In the past 12 months, we've seen many episodes of having heated arguments with members. I think that in the 2012-2013 report, paragraph 33.5, saying about the rationale of setting up the Committee on Rules of Procedure. In 1997, when the committee was set up, it was tasked to look at the rules and procedures of other committees. And the practice is based on the Westminster approach. I'll continue next time. Mr. Jeremy Tam, 30 seconds. I think Mr. Chan Kim-po should consider why some FC meetings was so long, because very often the government would give us fake documents, inches of documents just in the morning of the meeting. So you should ask the government not to submit documents so late. And you can also exercise your power to reshuffle the order of discussion in order to prevent the government from doing this. Mr. Kenny Lam, 2.5 years ago, when Mr. Tommy Cheung was the chairman, we adopted a resolution in response of an emergency, and that is the relief, the donation to relieve the victims of Nepalese earthquake. I was involved in approving the donation to Nepal. So that was an expedited arrangement. Mr. Chan, you may feel aggrieved, you may feel that you have been wronged by people in the past 12 months. Now you want to amend the 4 rules in our procedure so that you can have a smoother time as chairman of FC. Mr. Chan Kim-po. Well, I have been chairman of 2 years. I have taken into consideration of my experience and people's sentiments. And in response to Mr. Jeremy Tam's question, of course, it's not ideal for the government to submit the fake documents so late, but we could also submit our questions earlier to the government, so the late submission of answers is a result of a late submission of questions. Otherwise, the government has a top job, so are we. Changing the order of discussion of items, as I've said, the government is in the best position to decide which item should be approved first. which would represent the best utilization of resources, I believe the government is in the best position to decide the order. Dr. Fernando Zhang, Mr. Chan Kim-po, you are biased as chairman. You sent me off after the disqualification of the 4 members. I stood here, I did not obstruct the meeting, and still you evicted me, and now you want to change the rules that once the member is evicted, he or she cannot return on the same day. You are just trying to reduce our power to monitor the government. Well, last time I asked you to leave because there was a complaint from some other members, and that you are hindering our procedure, and you did not heed my advice to take the seat. And then you returned later. I allowed you to attend the meeting, and you punish yourself by standing up for 6 hours. Well, I was very tolerant. I did nothing while you were standing for 6 hours. But if a member has alerted me that a certain FC procedure has been breached, I have to do something. It's nothing personal. That as chairman, I have to do my duty. Mr. Leung, 1 minute. Yes, we have to follow the FC procedure fairly. In answering questions, Mr. Chen Kim-po, well, you are rather agitated. And because of this, there are many unhappy episodes between you and other members during some meetings. If we remain calm, we can resolve matters more easily. I think objectively, Mr. Chan should try to do something about emotional management, especially during meetings. This is the only advice I want to give to Mr. Chan in respect of his chairmanship for the past 24 months. Well, Mr. Chan admitted that sometimes the government did not do a good job, but then he would try to explain why on their behalf. For example, the government is in the best position on how best Hong Kong should be governed. Well, you are not a government official. You are chairman of the FC. I think you have overstepped the line. That's not your role. Mr. Kenneth Leung. The question of Ms. Mo is not directed to me, but I think we need to do something in terms of procedure. For important committees, procedures and rules, any changes or amendments should be considered by the Committee on Rules of Procedure first, and the chairman of the FC can initiate the process. I wonder whether Mr. Chan would do this if he is the chairman of the FC, because the chairman can propose that amendments to the committees of procedure be considered by the Committee on Rules of Procedure. I believe a closed-door session of the Committee on ROP would enable a very thorough discussion on different issues and points. Many members are concerned about my health and ask me to be peaceful. Thank you. I don't want to hurt myself emotionally and physically. But you have known me. You have known me for long. Well, I have strong views on what is right and what is wrong. But then I sometimes just cannot help it, because many people in Hong Kong are now influenced by the bad arguments or illogical arguments. I'm not trying to put up excuses for the government. Sometimes the government doesn't do a good job. Sometimes the fault is ours. I hope members understand that my position is not that the fault is always the government's. Well, some members said that you were agitated. I was agitated. I asked for an adjournment motion, and you didn't allow me to raise my point. What do you think about the proposal to abolish the PWSC and the ESC? Well, I think it's up to members. If they want to make amendments, they would make suggestions and they would write in. Rest assured that I would deal with such proposals fairly. On that particular incident, it's not an ideal situation. Within a short period of time, we had to deal with so many things, the item on the 3 hospitals and other livelihood items, and we didn't make it. But you committed a procedural error. You asked for an adjournment. It was not a question about the financial proposal. If you do not understand the procedure and you blame the chairman, it's not fair to me and to any chairman in the future. If you're not happy, I can certainly talk to you after the meeting. Mr. Leung, and then we proceed to the vote. The subcommittee should be there because we can be more focused in discussing government items. And why didn't Mr. Chen Kim-bo talk to the relevant members after the meeting, immediately after the meeting, that the proposal was not in line with the procedure? I hope that you can learn the lesson from this. Many members are not so conversant with the FC procedures like you.
Mr. Chiu Ka-chun still remember the incident after 3 months. So the time is now 6. So we will proceed to the vote. Can our staff please distribute the ballots, please?
大家睇清楚啊！就1號陳健波，2號梁繼昌。
Number 1 is Chen Kim-po and number 2 Ken Leung.
好嗱，我睇到我哋工作人員似乎派晒選票，我再
Apparently, ballot papers have been distributed. How many members are present? Does anyone have no ballot paper yet? All right, to the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. The distribution of ballot papers has ended. We now proceed to the vote.
對唔住啦，我講咗停止派出選票啦。OK。
Sorry, the distribution of ballot papers has stopped. Please collect the completed ballot papers. Before you cast your vote, please do not leave your seat. Would the two candidates please prepare to preside over the votes? And they are Mr. Tommy Chung and Mr. Joseph Lee.
冇啊，對唔住啊，我哋停止咗派出選票啦。
The distribution of ballot papers had stopped. For members who have received ballot papers, have you all cast your votes? All right. Please consolidate the ballot papers, and can we now invite Mr. Tommy Chung and Mr. Joseph Lee to supervise the counting process?
你唔埋到嚟，佢唔敢撈啲選票。
Please come a bit closer, and our staff will mix the votes.
我有個理由相信佢，我兩個走咗，佢仲喺度。一定係好快嘅啫，3年後散佢。你散啦？
派出幾多
58張。
哦，派出咧，秘書話派出58張。
58 ballot papers were distributed. We now proceed to the counting. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 2. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 2. Number 1. Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 2. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. Number 2. Number 1. 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 Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. We have collected 48 ballot papers, which was less than the number of ballot papers distributed. Actually, we made a mistake. We only distributed 48 ballot papers. Perhaps we should check the numbers again. All right, so we distributed 48 ballot papers and collected 48. Number 1, Chen Kin-po received 33 votes. Number 2, Kenneth Leung received 15 votes. Chen Kin-po is elected chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank members for electing me chairman. In the coming year, we understand there will be a lot of challenges and difficulties, and hopefully we can communicate more. We now proceed to the election of the deputy chairman of the Finance Committee in 2017-18. An effective nomination is made by one member and seconded by another member orally, and it must be accepted by the member being nominated. Mr. Lee, I nominate Mr. Michael Tian. Even though he is not present today, he told me that he wishes to receive everyone's support and continue his role as deputy chairman of the FC. Any seconders? Mr. Peter Shiu. Any other nominations? Dr. K. Kwok. Mr. Kenneth Leung. Mr. Kenneth Leung, do you accept the nomination? Anyone seconds? We have a lot of seconders. Do you accept the nomination, Mr. Leung? Yes. Since Mr. Michael Tian is not present, should we still want a discussion on this? Dr. K.K. Kwok, I think it's about the rules. When before you were elected, there was a time slot for discussion. Now, one of the candidates is absent, so that has taken away the time for questioning. This is a bit unfair to us. Mr. Michael Tian explained in writing that he had a meeting to attend, and we were well aware of that. But he is not prohibited from running for deputy chairman. But if you do not, if you are not happy about it, you might cast a vote against him. So, what do members think? Ms. Eddie Xu, Chairman, you have been elected already, so the FC is already in operation. So at the beginning of the next meeting, I suggest we can have a 30-minute discussion before proceeding to the vote. I think I have to follow the rules. A candidate can take part even if he or she is absent. So barring any further views, I will proceed to the vote. Please distribute the ballot papers. The speaker is not coming through. This is not a mandatory session as well. Chairman, according to what you said, in the future, even candidates for the chairman can just send in a letter. Candidates cannot be will not take questions. Is that how it goes? That is how it works as things stand. You can amend the rules if you wish, but these are how the rules stand at the moment. The speaker's not coming through. Chairman, I have a suggestion. Like you are having two systems within the same committee. The public is watching. Don't you find it hard to watch? Are you listening, Chairman? This is exactly our criticism of him. Chairman, you have been elected, but you have two sets of rules within the same committee. Of course, Mr. Michael Tian can run for deputy chairman, but that has nothing to do with whether there's a questioning session. If Longhair is here, he would have asked the same question. Next, Mr. Ray Chan. Mr. Michael Tian can still run for the deputy chairmanship despite being absent, but it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a questioning session if he's absent. Mr. Lam, you only have one candidate present, so you should give 15 minutes for discussion. You should give this some thought. And you talked about harmony. Anyone else? Ms. Elvin Yang. Chairman?
I mean this as a kind reminder for you and members. When we proceed to the vote, the candidates you support will certainly win. The pro-establishment members' choice will win. As you have said in your electioneering, you want harmony. There's no hurry. We have the chairman elected. We can we can handle our meetings now. So is there any rush? And we have time. So either we can have one candidate answering questions, or we can defer this part of the agenda to the next meeting. I just don't see any urgency here. Mr. Roy Kwong, Chairman. Would Mr. Michael Tin be willing to answer questions? He hasn't said anything to that effect. We started at 2 p.m. And now it's already 6. It's well past 6. Who would like to speak? And then I'll make a ruling. Oh, please jot down the names. Dr. Lo Wai Kok, Mr. Tommy Chang, Mr. Siu Ka-chun. Any more? Who else? Mr. Kwok Wai Kang? If not, then I'll draw a line and then I would make a ruling. Who else? We have already mentioned you. Dr. Lo Wai Kok, Chairman. We spent 30 minutes on questions and answers with 2 candidates, and now Mr. Michael Tin is not here. He cannot answer questions now, so let's have 15 minutes, and then we just ask one of the candidates to answer questions. Mr. Tommy Chang. We have verbatim records. we can record the questions, and then the questions can be referred to Mr. Tin, and then he can provide written replies. So let's have Mr. Kenneth Leung answer the questions raised by members now, and Mr. Tian do the same later. I do have questions for Mr. Kenneth Leung. I don't want to be silenced. So if you say there is no Q&A session, then I don't know whether it's appropriate. Well, I don't think we should defer the election of deputy chairman to the next meeting. The opposition camp would like to drag on. I don't. Only one of the two candidates is here, so for fairness' sake, I think we should give 15 minutes to members. All right, I rule that we would have 15 minutes on the Q&A session, and after that we'll proceed to the vote. Please press the button if you want to speak, but do bear in mind that you can only put questions. The answers can only come from Mr. Kenneth Leung. I would propose that the member raising questions should be given 30 seconds, and Mr. Kenneth Leung would have a minute to reply. Then if you have a question for Mr. Michael Tin, the Secretariat should record that for a later answer for Mr. Tin to answer later. We have 15 minutes. It's 6:20. We'll proceed to the vote after the 15 minutes. Dr. K.K. Kwok. Now Mr. Chen Kim-po has been elected chairman, and he's known to be biased towards the government and allows money to be spent wantonly. If you become the deputy chairman, Mr. Kenneth Leung, how would you prevent him from squandering public funds? Well, the FC exercise important functions, and that we monitor how the government spends money. And many budgets have, many projects have budget overruns. As for the style of individual chairman and whether there is any faults or shortcomings, I think we have all learned from the past. We have learned a lesson from the past. In the past 12 months, whether we're talking about executive legislature relationship or the pro-establishment relationship between pro-establishment members and the pro-democracy camp. I don't want to see the repeat of what we had in the past 12 months. As chairman or deputy chairman, he would have to act in a fair manner. Ms. Starity, I support Mr. Michael Tin's candidature. I will vote for him. Of course, it's not really nice to have a candidate absent. It would be It would have been much better if he's here to run for his re-election. But we all know that there are past precedents of candidates not being present at the time of election at different panels. Well, Mr. Michael Tin called you. You had the privilege of receiving calls from him, but he didn't call me. He also had my telephone number. I don't think a letter containing 100 words or so would be sufficient to explain why he would like to become deputy chairman of the FC. Whoever becomes chairman and deputy chairman of the FC, I hope they would communicate with all members of different parties in a fair manner. Mr. Daniel Chan, thank you, although I didn't vote for you. Last year, well, very often the chair next to you was empty, or the deputy chairman arrived late for the meeting. Mr. Kenneth Leung, can you promise us that you will be more diligent than Mr. Michael Tin? And are you going to help us to communicate to this rather strict chairman? Well, I think I can communicate with members without being very strict. Well, I was never given a chance to act as chairman, but I would promise you that I would be very hardworking, Ms. Chan. Mr. Siu Ka-chun. Well, the chairman of the FC in the past term was criticized as the spokesman for the government, because the chairman was even more concerned than the government in getting items approved. And very often, well, we said that we have been given expedited approvals, and when on hearing this, you would be very emotional. So what would Mr. Leung do about this? If the government communicate thoroughly, comprehensively to members before the meeting, and all documents needed have been given to members, and sufficient time is allowed for members to read the documents and think through issues, this problem will not arise. I think it's important for members and chairmen and to be thoroughly prepared before the meeting. Well, once he has become the chairman, Mr. Chen Kim-po has got another outburst of his style. Well, what can you do about this as deputy chairman in terms of amendments to our procedure? I would like to get the consensus of the council first. I believe there will be heated debates as regards how to, well, if I'm elected, I will be sitting next to him. How am I going to communicate with him? If he becomes too emotional, agitated, I'll squeeze on his thigh to calm him down. Very often, if he becomes too agitated, the proceedings will be affected. Well, don't play to the favorite action of the member concerned. Well, in light of what you have said, we must support you, Mr. Kenneth Leung. You were chairman of the ESC. The newly elected chairman of the FC is going to suggest the abolition of PWSC and ESC as deputy chairman. Are you going to go along with that? How can you make sure that the ESC and the PWSC will continue to discharge their functions. The ESC and the PWSC are dealing with issues that panels cannot. If we abolish the two subcommittees, the time taken for FC meetings will be even longer. Instead of just 4.2 hours for an item, then every member, all 70 of them, will have 2 minutes to ask questions. That means FC meetings will be even longer than they are. I would say that the two subcommittees should be retained. The only right way is to ensure that the two subcommittees function properly. Well, Chairman, you are being selective in telling what your experience is. In the middle of July, we could have arranged more meetings if you decided to do so. Many of these items should not have been passed in 1 minute on average. Mr. Deputy Chairman, if the speaking time is reduced to 2 minutes or 1 minute, then the dialogue between members and the government officials will not be meaningful. When Ms. Emily Lau was chairman of the FC, when the item on XRL was considered, well, she talked to the different parties to gauge their wishes to raise questions and how many questions would be put, and then she worked out the time required, say 25 hours before the proceeding to a final vote. So more preparation and more communication should be made before the meeting. Then I believe that the problems, however difficult they may be, can be resolved. I have a question for Mr. Kenneth Leung. It's about judgment. In the last session, Mr. Kenneth Leung was sitting somewhere, and he thought that there was equipment underneath the bench, but then it was found not to be so. He did not respond to the questions later.
First of all, that piece of clothing is still here. I did not see any need to apologize because I was a victim. And my judgment would not be different because of that isolated incident. Ms. Edward Lau, in the past budgets, your attendance and voting rates have been very low, and you said those items have been frivolous. So is there a need to stop the filibustering on these frivolous or meaningless items? I did not talk about an impact on the quality of LegCo, even though we might spend more time at certain things. And this shows the incompetence of Mr. Chen Kin-po. If he had worked harder or be more fair and transparent, the meetings could proceed smoothly. What about the amendments to the appropriation bill? Did they have nothing to do with Mr. Kenneth Leung? Kenneth Leung, you still have time. I have nothing to add. Any more questions? We still have about 2 minutes. If not, we will distribute the ballot papers.
係咪要讀呢段？嗱，當委員喺選票上蓋印後呢，我會宣布投票嘅程序結束。屆時呢，
After that, we will stop distributing the ballot papers and our staff would collect the ballot papers. Members who receive a ballot paper must personally cast their vote into the ballot box. Until you do that, please do not leave your seats. Please use the stamp to chop next to the number of the candidate you prefer. Number 1 is Michael Tian, number 2 candidate Leung. This is a secret ballot, so please do not show your ballot paper to others. There's no need to fold the ballot paper.
仲有冇邊位係未收到選票嘅？
Does everyone have a ballot paper? If so, please proceed to the vote.
仲有一位請派埋嗱，派埋呢張咧，我要停止派發選票㗎啦。
I will soon stop the distribution of ballot papers.
派咗幾多選票？
55張，你未
55張，頭先我40幾張啫喎。
係啊，頭先好多人遲翻。
工作人員已經派出咗55張選票，現在
55 ballot papers have been distributed, and our staff will start collecting the ballot papers. Members, please personally cast the papers into the ballot box. Until you do so, please do not leave your seats.
開始。咩啊？咩啊？
葉太係遲入嚟。
冇啊冇啊。好啊！現在請提名田北辰議員同埋梁繼昌議員嘅監票人士咧係
Can the members supervising the counting for Mr. Michael Tian and Mr. Kenneth Leung please come forward?
李慧瓊議員、
Ms. Dari Lee and Dr. KK Kwok will monitor the counting. Per our usual practice, the votes would be counted.
1號
Number 1. Number 1. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. This is an invalid ballot. Number 1. Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 2. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. 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 Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 2. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 2. Number 2. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. 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 I announce the results. Michael Tian received 33 votes, Mr. Kenneth Leung 21, and 1 invalid vote. Mr. Michael Tian is elected. That is the end of the meeting. We will notify you of the date of the next meeting. Thank you very much.